Life is change. When the change stops, it's over. So I, as a plastic surgeon, am in the habit of executing some very acute physical changes. Okay. We are all visual creatures and social animals, and physical appearance has both subtle and profound effects on human relations. If you change the way you look, and you saw that with the previous speaker, you change the way you see yourself and the way others perceive you. But my real love is for reconstruction, because I'm cognizant that it's so much more than simply form and function, resurfacing a wound or a defect. It can reconstruct a life. It can reconstruct a future, families, relationships. And the changes don't have to be massive. They can be measured in millimeters, but they can still redirect a whole destiny. So if you have a cleft lip and palate, you're only moving small fragments of tissues by millimeters, but the baby that you hand back to the family is so altered, it's like a second birth, and the future is inevitably and joyfully transformed. It's this meticulous attention to detail and mindfulness of outcome which makes reconstruction so special. Of course, pain and loss is subjective. One man's deep psychological wound can be another's superficial, superfluous trivia, and it's unimportant. It's about what it means to you to be whole, to be intact. So I want you to imagine the scene. I was in a darkened cinema. The big screen in front of me, Lord of the Rings. The music's getting louder and louder and louder, big crescendo, popcorn crunching, and then suddenly Frodo's finger is bitten off. And there and then, my heart just sank. All I could think of is that is going to take hours to sew back on. And then it was like coming to. It's okay. It's just his index finger. Oh, it's even more okay. It's just a movie. But the index finger isn't really going to have any physically detrimental effect. Your hand will still be competent and continent, and you'll still have good grip strength. And many a manual laborer, self-employed person will happily sacrifice it. In fact, in the trade, if you're in that situation, that proof of life is requested, non-dominant index finger every time. You don't need it. However, if you have the same injury to the ring finger, shall we say, of the left hand in a young woman, then it can be deeply psychologically traumatizing. And so it's about what the loss means to you, which dictates what the gain means to you, and the lengths you'll go to try and achieve wholeness again for you. And so we know as plastic surgeons that we are sewing back on hope, well-being, good health. We are actually repairing self-image. And self-image seems to be a very plastic, flexible thing. There are people who can undergo or withstand an awful lot of change, but still have a very robust sense of self. And so there are people who can withstand a literal loss of face. Usually heroic soldiers, valiant war injuries, mighty testaments to survival. And we know from symbolic interaction theory that self-esteem and identity is determined by how you interpret other people's behavior towards you. So perhaps in matters of valor and honor, it's much easier to accept that disfigurement. Plastic surgery in the UK developed during the Great Wars, World War I, World War II, and it was all about the medical ingenuity required to move tissues from one place to another. So simple things like moving your forehead tissue to your nose, that's been documented in the literature since at least 1500 BC. But then there were other things. And if you had a grotesque injury, there were only so many tissues you could move before you ran out of tissues. And then you're left with something that might look elegant and pristine, but it's unmoving. And really the most moving thing about that picture is that bewildered sorrow that you can see in his eyes. Today, face transplant surgery follows in the tradition of plastic surgery for medical ingenuity and surgical prowess. The original discussions, the ethical debate was all about, is it justified for a life of immunosuppression, and what would you look like? Would you look like yourself because of your bone structure and that play of muscles? Or would you look like the donor, the deceased? Is that maybe a change too far? All of that was answered in November 2005 with the world's first partial face transplant. The transplant is actually most of the nose, the lips, the chin, and the lower cheeks, and it was an astounding success. Although the surgery was complicated, innovative, challenging, and took 27 hours, there was movement within 18 months. None of us had anticipated or expected that we would have such a good result. And I hope you'll understand, or you'll accept, that even though it's not life-saving, it's life-changing, and it may well make for a life worth living. Face transplants are mercifully rare, but breast transplants are something that breast reconstruction is something that we're much more used to, and that's another more readily accessible example of the psychological impact of loss and the desire for reconstruction. My specialty is breast reconstruction, and it's been interesting that even within the last few years we are pushing out surgical interventions to far younger and healthier people. In fact, if you have a genetic predisposition to breast cancer, we will readily offer risk-reducing surgery and reconstruction because the reconstructions are so uplifting and so life-affirming. But what it does do is distort the social perception of the enormity of the diagnosis. It's a big ask to ask someone young and healthy to lose both their breasts. But hopefully you can accept that there is justification in all the many, many hours of surgery required to reconstruct a life, because the need to be whole, the need to feel yourself is so understandable. But what if there is no pathology? No words like malignancy, metastasis, risk. What if you're simply ill at ease? And that's the true meaning of the word disease, dis-ease. So what would make you so ill at ease within your own body, so uncomfortable that you would seek as much help as you can? So what if you were born in the wrong body and you felt yourself to be something completely different? There are no easy answers. You have to change your entire external world. You have to change your hormonal milieu, your social life, your legal standing. Everything around you has to change so you can be true to your inner self, the self that you know yourself to be. And I have met some remarkable individuals who have crossed cultures and continents trying to be true to themselves. I've helped them change in either direction, from men to women, or even, as has been the case, back again when, as he said, it didn't work out. But it's very, very hard to understand that deep calling to be yourself. But let's move to something a little bit more easy, the reinvention of self when we think of aesthetic reconstruction. So aesthetic reconstruction is a very delicate balance between the image that you would like to be, the image in your head, and the image that you see when you're looking at your reflection. And it can be a profound form of healing. Not everybody seeks change. Perhaps it's only those who have something left to say or something that they want to express. So you may request something very, very subtle, perhaps just smoother skin or fewer wrinkles. Or you might want something quite small, like change the shape of your nose or maybe remove a mole. Or you might require a whole new passport. And we as a society have a very fractious relationship with people when they self-actualize in this way. When "who do you think you are" is answered visually, we find it difficult to accept. And this is where I think we have been sold a very powerful but very malicious myth. We are sold a gullible heroine. She enters into a big castle, the hospital, and falls into a deep black velvet enchanted sleep, anesthesia, and then she is woken up by the handsome prince, male surgeon, and he rescues her from her old life, and of course she lives happily ever after. The transformation is utterly passive and utterly untrue. It's not like that at all. The things which are unfortunately true are the poison that we are sold of photoshopped images and paper-thin happiness, which is completely impossible, and also the wickedness of the media, which then ridicules, mocks, jeers people who try to better themselves. And I think that we're all very familiar with that media witch, and we know what she says. But I don't agree with this tale. I think it's completely different. I think the protagonist is not gullible. I think they're curious, they're motivated, they're searching for solutions, and their empowerment comes through knowledge, and the choices they make are brave, even if others decry them, and the transformation when it comes is psychological, and that far precedes any physical transformation that we then help them with. So if the shoe is to fit, you have to have ownership of the journey and the transformation. It's not passive. Abraham Maslow calls this self-actualization. He says everybody has a desire to be the best that they can be, and I completely concur. But he described a pyramid and a ranking system where once you've done basics like food, physical health, safety, shelter, perhaps then you can move on to higher rankings and higher motivational needs like self-esteem, love, relationships. And very, very few, maybe 1 in 100, are actually self-actualized. But I don't think it works like this. Most pyramids are man-made, and nature is almost invariably about curves and divine proportions. So what I'm offering is perhaps a circle of needs. And it could be that you need enough of each, enough of all of those needs, that you can feel whole and feel intact. And you may have them in different proportions at different times, so you're not always going to have as much physical good health or as much love and relationships as you might have at other times. But if you have enough, you may or you may not be whole. So I think being a surgeon is an immense privilege. You are invited into the most extreme moments of people's lives, and you get an insight into the human condition. I think surgery is a very sharp tool. It cuts cleanly and precisely, and it could be that it's never the answer to any question, but it can change a life. And I think reconstruction has a very subtle blade, and if you use it wisely, you can use the tip of the blade just to find the plane between worlds and help you move into different lives. Thank you.